Hi, my name is Deon Rebello, and I'm the CEO of DCX Bullion. Welcome to episode 5 of our podcast. Hi, Willem. How you doing?
Good and you, Dion.
Very good, thank you. We've spoken about this already, and we had teed it up last week, discussed that we were going to do the sovereign default. And we're going to look at what actually spurred this on originally was in October of 2020. The then Tito, the late Tito Mboweni, was the finance minister of South Africa. And he was confronted with a number of issues that South Africa was on the precipice of a sovereign default. He instituted a couple of things within government then, and one of them big was that there were no salary for government employees, no increases over a certain period of time. There needed to be reforms from the municipalities and so on to avoid the sovereign default. But more importantly, and we know how that story's gone, is we then got a grey listing, and we still haven't got out of the woods to a possible sovereign default. So part of today's discussion is what that actually really means. What an effect on an economy or the man in the street, what effect would a sovereign default have on them?
So let's start at the very beginning and define what is a sovereign default. Now, if you boil it down to its very roots, the sovereign default happens when a government or a sovereign state is unable or unwilling to pay their debt. And yeah, that can happen for a number of reasons. And but usually what it boils down to is a government can't afford to pay back its debt.
So, to simplify that, basically, also another way of looking at it is um, the income that the government, as far as revenues bringing in, is less than what they're spending. Simple, like if you were a layperson and you had a loan with a bank and you're unable to pay it because your income has decreased, it's the same thing, but it's now on a micro scale or macro scale, being a country, SA Inc., for example.
Correct. And what we've seen is that no country is immune. You know, we saw the mighty USA almost go into a sovereign default, I think it was about a year ago. So that just tells us there's no country that's immune. There's a possibility of it happening regardless of what country you're in. And it's a very real threat. And as you said, yes, we were facing that with Finance Minister Tito Mboweni mentioning it, and the protocols he suggested we put in place for that. And since then, I mean, it was literally a case of the majority of the government's income was going towards just servicing interest on our debts.
And that's quite an interesting part of this whole thing is, we wanted to see exactly what a sovereign default would do to the man in the street. We in South Africa live in rands. We've seen over the last 50 years the slow devaluation of the rand to dollar. We've seen what that brings. But of course, north of South Africa, north of the Limpopo, you got a country by the name of Zimbabwe, where we've seen not just inflation, but hyperinflation.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, Zimbabwe is a very extreme case. I mean, even with a new currency that they tried to implement, that I mean, that's already gone. It's already been destroyed by hyperinflation. So yes, Zimbabwe is a very extreme case, but if we look at, and what we usually do is we look at Argentina because that's a recent example, and I think it's a better, more realistic example of what would actually happen to, let's say, South Africa if were to have a sovereign default.
And to qualify that also, it's important. You must remember, Argentina is also an emerging market, an emerging country. We fall within that same bracket. They have a similar demographics to us as far as commodity rich country that they do a lot of exporting on and rely heavily on. And so is South Africa historically.
Yeah, so if we look at it, it was in May, I think, of 2020. Argentina had a sovereign default. And that was right at the, just as COVID was coming into full swing and they defaulted. And we thought it would be interesting to see and keep track of what's happening to their currency, what that would mean to the man in the street. And we actually did a little bit of a study on that, and we've come up with some numbers. So let's take it back to January 2020.
Okay.
This was before Argentina had their sovereign default, and the Argentina peso was sitting to 59.76 to the US dollar.
Okay.
And then obviously, I think it was March, if I'm correct, they had the default, and we've been keeping track of what's happening to their currency and what would have happened to you had you had, I don't know, 1 million Argentina pesos stuck under your mattress or in the bank or something like that. And it's actually quite frightening. If so let's start with what you would have had in January 2020. Your 1 million Argentina peso would have been worth $16,733 US dollars. And they would have bought you 11 ounces of gold, essentially. Now, today, that gold is valued at $31,557. And if we were to convert what the peso is sitting at right now, that would translate to 33 million Argentinian peso.
Okay, so just you've dumped a whole lot of very good information there, but now let's unpack that because what's quite important here is and you know when we did this case study, and this is a lovely thing with a lot of what we do is we kind of make it as real as possible. We want to understand. So typically you told keep your money in a bank account. So if you had 1 million pesos in January of 2020 with the devaluation of the peso to the dollar, I mean, currently the peso is sitting at over, I think, 1,095 pesos.
1,053 this morning.
Yeah. To the dollar. So what that is also will mean is I've got money in a bank. I've worked my butt off. I've been looking after my family, and I want to make sure that when I get to that point of wanting to accumulate my assets so I can retire or I can afford to send my children to schools and so on. I mean, that's all part of how we live. We live to accumulate wealth so we can utilize it when we need it or for later occasions. So if I'd kept 1 million pesos in the bank account, currently it'd be in buying power would not even be worth probably about 30 to 40,000 pesos in actual real buying power. But and this is what's important is Willem, you mentioned that million pesos would have bought you 11.03, basically 11 ounces of gold. 1 million pesos right now, how many ounces would it buy you?
0.3, a third. It would buy 1/3 of an ounce of gold right now.
Okay, so that's a perfect example of exactly what we're talking about here now. Is from 1 million pesos buying 11 ounces, and 11 ounces is substantial. I mean, the current value of that in dollars,
Is $31,500.
which is unbelievable. And this is the thing. During a time of a sovereign default, we know that everything goes into inflation, things go up, and people still want to be able to live. Now, suddenly your million pesos, as I said, in the bank will start to lose value. And unless you start to keep up, or if you're getting a salary increase, and we also know traditionally during these periods of time, there's job losses, there's all these kind of things. So the idea of people actually having an increase in salary to meet that requirement with what inflation brings is taken away completely.
And that's the scariest thing. I mean, it's we keep talking about the loss of buying power, currency devaluation, and that's exactly what this does. If we look at what that million pesos is worth today, you're looking at 5.6% of its original value. So you'll be able to buy with that same million pesos, you'll be able to buy 5% of what you used to.
So I wasn't far off when I said about 30 to 40,000 pesos to in actual buying power. So it's 50,000 pesos in actual buying power. But what's interesting is those 11 ounces. So as someone that wants to mitigate these losses that a default would bring, it's about making sure we know that gold is a safe haven during these uncertain times. And this is a perfect example. Those 11 ounces in Argentinian pesos is worth.
It's worth 33 million, 33 million 251.
So
pesos right now.
again, and then as we said, a million pesos would right now will only buy you zero point 0.3 of an ounce. So literally a third of an ounce you could buy for a million pesos. Yet in January of 2020, it would have bought you 11 ounces. So the interesting thing here, and this is what we always talking about, is we live in these economies, and how do we make sure that we can negate some of these losses? And again, South Africa, we through the last couple of years, as I mentioned, we had the grey listing. Recently, as mentioned in the previous podcast, the Trump administration is now officially is president of the U.S. And he has a very different foreign policy to the former administration. And he's made it abundantly clear that, and just in the media this last week, with South Africa's discussions on land reform, he made it very clear that they would not be funding a country that does those kind of policies. Regardless if it's right or wrong, at the end of the day, we as the civil society, we the ones that are affected by these bigger decisions.
Yeah, 100% right, Dion. And I mean, regardless of what sort of aid they are providing at the moment, the monetary value of that aid, yes, it's quite a chunk of money. But what that does is it changes the world's perspective of a country. It changes the interest, the investment value of that country. And that's the thing. And once the investment value of a country goes down, you'll see the currency plunging.
So very simply, foreign investment becomes less and less. And if you have less foreign investment, remember we spoke about revenue that the country earns versus the expenses. The less revenue you have, and another thing is they want to exercise more revenue from already heavily burdened taxpayers. So this kind of puts the situation where that revenue coming into SA Inc. is diminishing, yet our costs are going up. We look at January 2020 when we went into the whole COVID thing globally. That was an issue. The country then secured international loans to help stop our economy from crashing. A lot of those loans we are now having to repay, and we having to extend further more debt and acquire more debt in order to just function basically.
And the biggest problem with those loans is that they need to be repaid in US dollars.
Yeah.
They're not being repaid in rands, they're being repaid in US dollars. And the further the rand falls, the heavier of a burden that becomes on the country. I mean, we use the US dollar, it's the world reserve currency. It is, despite everything, still the strongest currency in the world. And I mean, that's why we also compared the Argentinian peso, that million pesos then and now. And if you look at that right now, that million pesos is worth $950.
Interesting enough, and this is a bit of a sidestep, we brought the whole South African economy. So in January of 2020, a million rand would have bought you how much gold?
That's 47 ounces.
So 47 ounces. What was the rand to dollar at that
Rand to
point?
dollar was sitting at 14 rand to the dollar.
14 rand to the dollar. Where are we right now?
We're sitting at 1862
Okay.
morning.
And what would a million rands buy you in gold?
A million rand right now. So let's take a look at the value in US dollars first. So 2020, that million rand was worth $71,500 roughly.
Yes.
Today, it's worth 35,700.
So it's nearly
So
doubled.
it's a decrease. Well, it's 75% of the original value.
Yeah.
So that's that 25% gone. And the difference is we haven't had a sovereign default. We haven't had anything dramatic happening. That's just pure currency devaluation
Over the last 5
over
years.
the last 5 years. And if we look at that now, with the gold price sitting where it is, it's crossed the 2,800. In fact, it shattered it. It's closer to touching 2,900 now. And so with the gold price where it is right now, you'll be able to buy 18.7 ounces of gold with that million rand.
Okay, so let's just recap those two together. So if January of 2020 in rands, a million rand would have bought me how many ounces? 47 ounces. Right now, a million rand will buy me
18.7. So 18 if we take if we're rough.
So that is even more than half the value has been lost. And that's just the devaluation of the rand to dollar. And this is what's important. And I think, we talk about this all the time. And I always liken it to, we live in this economy and we see the devaluation, but we don't see it really affecting us. Yes, we see things going up, but it's small percentages. But if you take that step back, within 5 years, we've lost more than half the value of what we had 5 years ago. If you had bought gold, that million, that 46 ounces would be worth.
Well, it would be worth $134,000, which translates to 2.5 million rand.
Okay, so a million rands worth of gold in January of 2020 would be worth 2.5 million rand right now. So where all costs are decreasing and inflation and everything that we are hoping to achieve with wealth preservation, based on the current situation, here we go. We put it into gold, we hold, and 5 years later, we haven't just made our money back, we've actually grown our money further.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, we talking about the currency devaluation. Now that counts for 25% loss. So your million rand today is worth 75% of what it was in 2020. However, that million rand is worth only 40% of what it would have been if you had put it into gold. And that's why gold is such a great protector of wealth, of as a vehicle for wealth preservation. And that's why during times of turmoil, during geopolitical issues, during uncertainty, people invest in gold.
Willem, I'm always amazed by this, because we talk about this all the time, and we're very much involved in it. I mean, we're literally at the coal face or the mine face, literally. So for us to see and understand these figures, it's only, and that's what I love about what we've been doing with these case studies, and we keep them ongoing so we can always go back to them and continue to compare. And again, the last episode we spoke about RAs. Now, if you had kept your money in RA, or if you'd invested the same in premiums in gold, this is a perfect example again. Keep your money in the bank, the returns would be X. And again, I don't think there'd be very few investments that would have come to close to that growth over the same period of time.
No, I definitely think so. And I mean, if we're looking at all of these, I mean, we even did the same exercise with Nigeria, with the Naira. And it's the same old story. In 2020, your million Naira would have been worth $2,700. Today, it's worth 671. That's a 24% of the original value. Had you kept it in gold, you would have 7.7 million Naira now. And it's a common theme throughout all of the emerging countries. We're losing value in our currency, and I think it's the case of the frog in the pot. It's
Yes.
being boiled so slowly that we don't realize it. I think Nigeria and Argentina, obviously, there's been massive shocks to the system, so it's not
Their
quite the
pots are
same
bubbling.
thing. Their pots are very much bubbling, and I think they went in hot. I mean, and to be fair, Argentina also did a manual devaluation of their currency at one point. So it jumped from, I think it was 405 or 500 peso to the dollar to 800. So they had that as well. But you know what? Your bank account doesn't care.
Yeah.
You still only have a million pesos in there.
Again, that's the macro and the micro. So the macro being the country, SA Inc. or Argentina Inc. or Nigeria Inc. The government makes certain decisions, or even like we said, Cyril Ramaphosa making certain statements this last week with regards to land reform and so on. Yes, those are policies, but at the end of the day, the man in the street, regardless of your gender, color, or creed, are directly affected by what is said and done on our behalf of the people that we put into government. And this is all over the world.
No, definitely, and it's a matter of perception. Once a country is seen as unreliable or unstable or anything like that, the investor demand or the investor interest decreases. And as soon as that happens, your currency will fall.
And for me, that's probably one of the biggest concerns. I mentioned the whole thing with of October of 2020 when it was then the midterm budget speech that Tito gave. And and for us, as a business, we paid a lot of attention to what he had to say because we actually wanted to hold him account for it. And what was interesting is government could not hold any of those reforms over that period of time. I don't even think could hold it for more than a year.
It wasn't even close.
Yeah.
It wasn't even close. Yeah, it wasn't even a year before they told.
Salary, yes, and that was zero increase in salaries for all government employees. The other one was reform of municipalities. To date, and again, depending on which province you live in within South Africa, the deterioration is running at a more greater scale now than ever.
And the thing is, it's not unique to South Africa.
Absolutely.
It's countries all over the world. I mean, yes, you've got your countries that are absolutely on the ball and they're doing very well, but for the majority of developing countries, it's a common theme. There's corruption. There's governments that are not pushing out the best policies. There's loans being taken out. There's this expectation that other countries will help us, which, let's face it, they don't really have an obligation to do that. We're supposed to be taking care of ourselves. We're supposed to be looking after ourselves. And at the end of the day, it doesn't always work out for the best.
Yeah, and I think, what you're also raising is a very, very important thing. You mentioned America was almost at that point of some form of a sovereign default, but they are a settled economy. They're known as a first world economy. But if we look at that, and that's also debt to GDP ratios. Now, South Africa, interesting enough, in 2020, we went to close to, I think it was just short of about 88% of our debt to GDP ratio. As an emerging market, we cannot take on that amount of debt. The US, for instance, I think is over 120% in debt to GDP ratio. They, as an established economy, can afford to do that. Well, that's what we're told. And again, that's also coming to be questioned over the next couple of years. Can the US economy maintain those levels of debt? And already the Fed has made it very clear that they're actually battling. And again, monetary policy comes into play here, where if there's an issue, just print more dollars. And we're knowing that that's not the solution anymore.
No, I definitely think we're in for a wild ride here. What's going to happen? We're going to have to wait and see. But I think there's going to be some big moves happening. If you look at some of the policies of countries deciding not to trade in dollar anymore, America with its new, quite strict, harsh policies on um, duties and taxes and cutting off aid, it's going to ruffle some feathers. There's going to be pushback, and there's going to be countries that are trying to make other plans. It's as simple as that.
Well, you talk about that, and I'm actually quite interested that the AGOA agreement, which is it's a number of different African countries that have an agreement with the US for preferential rates into the States. Ours is well worth over $1 billion that this country enjoys those benefits. That is actually due to be either renewed or not. And there is a concern based on the current, as you speak very clearly, that Trump has a very different outlook on, firstly, foreign policy to the world, never mind to Africa. I mean, his neighbors, Canada, he put instant tariffs, and the Canadian president came out and said, really? Okay, if you want to do that, from now, 25% on all American goods. And in fact, within the next 30 days, and he basically, the Canadian president said, if you choose to go this way, that's fine. I'm urging all Canadian companies to find better suppliers. That serves as an opportunity for economies like ours, where they are now being forced to find new suppliers of different goods.
And the thing is, it's out there. I
Yeah.
mean, America has gotten away with throwing its weight around, and it probably will continue to do so for a while. But already you see Canada walking to stores. You've got sections where there used to be American products, which is empty now. I mean, just the liquor industry. I read yesterday it's worth a good chunk of change, a few $1 billion to the US. And already you walk into a liquor store and there's nothing. There's no more US beer. There's no more US whiskey. It's all been replaced with Canadian or other. And that's the thing that's going to happen is, you know, countries that get hit hard and feel they're being unjustly targeted by this is going to find other solutions. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. And I think for me, that's probably with every conflict or every setback, there's always an opportunity that's presented. Um, we as a country, as an economy, these are opportunities that if we can get our house in order, we could be benefiting from it. I mean, I look at countries like India, where they have got some of the biggest call centers in the world because their dollar per hour on staff on employment is far less than Europe and the US.
No, definitely, it is across the board, and it's simply because it costs a lot less to live here. You know, where you walk into a New York apartment and it's a tiny little one bedroom or even a one room studio apartment, and you're looking at $3,000-4,000 a month in rent. I mean, let's translate that. $4,000, that is what, 70,000 Rand. Can you imagine paying 70,000 Rand for a one room apartment
Per month.
per month?
You could, in this country, at 75,000 Rand per month, you would have a very luxurious big home with a big property, big security for that kind of value of
You'd be
money.
buying your own house, your own three-bedroom house. It's as simple as that. And that's the thing. That's why labor is so much cheaper in other countries. That's why they outsource so much of this stuff. And you know, the US has, or Trump has this plan of let's bring back jobs to the US, but where's he going to find somebody willing to work for that, do that job for that money? And I think that's the point that they're missing. Is yes, there's a lot of other problems attached to all of that, but the basic thing is life is too expensive.
So just in closing, Willem, I want to just go back to what we started with, which was sovereign default, and specifically looking at South Africa. Uh, are we there? Will we get there? The likelihood is we're not out of it. We are still under grey listing. And again, these new things that are coming up with land reform, with trans response, and then the Go thing coming into place. That all affects how we will remember. I said revenue in versus expenses out. And if we get to that point where we're unable to cover it, that will send us into a default. And of course, overnight, and we've seen, just as you'd mentioned earlier, without any massive political issues, just from 2020 to now, the devaluation of the rand to dollar, the growth in gold over that same period of time, and what it would have bought you versus now. And again, that's just under normal conditions. As you mentioned, Argentina, and from 59 pesos to over 1,000 pesos in the space of 5 years. Nigeria, same thing. It's got so bad in Nigeria that most Nigerians actually hold dollars as a form of wealth preservation. And we've been discussing with a couple of Nigerians, businessmen, and we said, why hold dollars when you can hold gold? Because it actually outperforms dollars also. And that's a whole new perspective for people within that country.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you know, we talking about a sovereign default. Are we going to get there? We've already seen no country is immune. We look at Argentina. We look at, I think it was Pakistan recently had one as well.
Yes.
You know, and the US coming that close, it just really goes to show you that we are by no means safe. We are by no means out of the woods. We've taken on a lot of debt on top of debt that was already almost too much to handle. Um, Policies that were put in place to prevent all of this have been chucked out the window. And when's it going to happen? I don't know. We'll have to see, especially now with all of these new things coming into play as well. Um, it's a constant threat that is there, and you might not think about it on a day-to-day basis, but it's there, and the chances of that happening is always there.
In closing, Willem, and I just want your final thoughts. But for me, this is why I do what I do. This is why we do what we do, and this is why we're even talking to you right now. Is for us, it's so important for people to understand this information, that there are always options where you think there aren't. There's always an option. There's always a way to mitigate these things. And again, go do your research. Make sure you go and see what's available out there. For me, and I've always say this and I'll say it again, for me, it's about a paradigm shift. It's about making someone that's listening to this think, I didn't actually have a think about that. Maybe I need to look into gold. Maybe I need to look into bullion as a way of maintaining or negating some of these perceived losses or full losses that we will see in the near future.
Yeah, and the thing about gold specifically is that it is geo-neutral. It's
Correct.
it's an effective way of hedging your money out of rands, and it's important that you do that. If you look at your local investments, your RAs, your fixed accounts, all of those things, they're all rand based, and that's the big problem. They cannot mitigate the currency devaluation, while gold is not rand based, it's dollar based, and it's a very effective way of hedging your money out of rands into US dollar.
I couldn't have said it better. Just in closing, I think we're going to be, of course, the next installment, episode 6, will come out next week. And again, we are going to give you a surprise on what we'll do there. But I think I actually want to look at probably platinum. And again, platinum's had quite an interesting journey. It was the superstar of 2023. It was the poor brother, the begging bowl in 2024. But then again, I mean, the performance of gold and silver in 2024 was just unparalleled. But I think platinum has a lot of exciting things that we want to talk about. And again, this podcast, the primary focus of this podcast is about information. It's about making people aware of options that they probably wouldn't have thought about.
No, it definitely is. And if you enjoyed the information, be sure to hit the like button. If you want to hear more, consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.
Thank you. Take care.